All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about what we're doing this week in Lab 7 to prepare you for what we're doing next week and to sort of fill in a couple blanks. So at the end of this week, and let me be explicit, there is no intermediate object in Lab 7. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you're not turning anything in this week with the exception of one thing, which is you're making your data available to us at the end of the by early next week so that we can prepare it for use in next week's lab. Now in the assignment you'll see that there are a couple things you are asked to provide. Ultimately, one of your outputs in Lab 7 will be a map of your study area. So you've gone out, you've explored businesses in a certain area, you've gathered some information on that location, and object number one for Lab 7 is a description of your study location. You're the only one that's been there, so tell us everything that's relevant about it. And so on one hand, you are generating a map. On another, you're generating some descriptive statistics of the area, like what's the concentration of different business types. You're going to generate that by way of calculation and summarizing, and I'll walk through some of those steps in this video. But fundamentally, the objects that you'll submit with that are a map of the location and an account of the various characteristics of the neighborhood that you have generated. So what percentage of businesses are retail? What percentage of businesses are something else? Those sorts of things allow you to create what we'll call a thick description, not a thick subscription, of your survey area. So that's going to be object number one that you submit at the end of the day with this lab. Object number two is, well, we've got a bunch of us out looking at different survey areas. And so just like we've talked about, say, with Soils Lab, what we can do is treat each of those as a sample location and take a look at trends across our various samples and say, is there some sort of pattern that we see here? Are certain business types configured in certain ways, or are there different neighborhood types that kind of predict what kind of businesses are there? There are all kinds of questions we can ask. So in the data collection process, we're getting information from two different sources, and we're putting these together in this portion of the lab. On one hand, you've got all your observations. In week one of our lab component of Lab 7, we are taking the data that you collected and putting them together in a data table. So you have things like the number of restaurants, the different types of restaurants, the things that you, of businesses, different retail services, how many of each. We're going to generate those sorts of statistics out of the data that you generated and come up with some summary descriptive statistics. And then we're also going to, as part of this lab, generate a few neighborhood characteristics. So what you're going to do is download data from the Census Bureau for all of the tracts in the counties that your study area is within, repeating some steps we learned in Lab 2. And then we're going to generate a neighborhood. We're going to take all the census tracts within 2 miles of your study area and generate some things like what's the average income of that neighborhood? What is the population density of that neighborhood? What's the percentage of the population in that neighborhood that is non-white? What is the education level? What percentage of the population hold BAs? Those things allow us to compare one study area to another study area and see if those different demographics and different neighborhood characteristics show us some sort of pattern of human settlement. Now that analysis is exactly what we're going to do next week. What I'm asking you to do this week is prepare all the data that we need for that larger community analysis by providing a thick description of your survey location this week. So what you want to have at the end of the day is best understood by looking at our data entry sheet. So in the data entry sheet that each of you used to look at your survey locations, so filling in this data sheet, there's also this survey overall sheet. And I would suggest that you copy this version. This is the version that you, what I'm looking at is from the shared Google Drive for this class, which you probably already have downloaded once. I have updated this sheet, the survey overall sheet, so that you can add some information like your name, your section, Wednesday or Friday, where your survey location is and use that. You could say Catonsville or Columbia, or you can also include what county it's in if it's not in an incorporated place, and what state. So you can identify the location here, just whatever geographic identifiers you choose to use. Particularly if it's not in Maryland, you might want to indicate that. Then take sort of a representative. If you've got a bunch of points, and here you can see in the example I'm going to work with, which is borrowing one of your data sets, I've got these points that are kind of in a linear pattern. If I just pick one of these, I can take the latitude and longitude. You can see if I select a point that is centrally located in my survey area, I'm just going to take that latitude and longitude and plug them in here as basically the center of my survey area, so that we can map your survey areas. And then I ask you a few other questions. I've sort of described these. If you have questions about what I'm asking you to do in those, feel free to ask. Then you'll notice there are these questions in orange. These are all functions of your work. So I'm saying, how many businesses did you survey? Well, in this study area that I'm using it as an example, 34. And so I return to my data entry sheet and type in 34. In other words, you are going to populate this entire row of this data table. These orange things are all things that you gather from your actual observations. So the total number of businesses. Then you want to know the total number of retail establishments. How do you get that? Well, you can just count from your data table, or you can run a summarize command. If this were a really long table, that's probably what you would want to do. And when you run a summarize command, what you're doing is saying whenever that column repeats, or the values in the column repeat, put them together. So food and food would be collapsed into a single category. So we're aggregating our data not by individual points, but by categories of points. And so here I'm going to say take category, the different type, retail, service, food, etc., and gather a count. How many times does each of those occur? This is actually gathered by default when we run a summary command. And the output of this looks like this. So I learned that there are 4 vacant buildings or spaces, and there are 9 food establishments and 4 parking locations, etc. And I would just take those values and enter them in under these totals. If I then know that there are 13 retail establishments, in my study area, so I'd put in 13. Then over here where it says percent retail, I'll just enter a formula which is equals 13, the total number of retail establishments, divided by, so I just put in a //34, enter, and I know that 38% of the businesses in my study area are retail establishments. Now, knowing those concentrations and how they vary from study area to study area will tell us something about study areas overall, or business districts overall. So these are all things you're going to calculate directly out of your observations. If you have any questions about that, that's what LabTime's for. These blue measures are things that you're going to calculate using census data. So you're going to download several measures from the Census Bureau. Total population. The total area of each tract ships with the shapefile. Use that measurement. It's called ALAND 10, A-L-A-N-D 10. It is the area of each tract in square meters. It's kind of weird measurement, but there you go. You're also going to download median household income and eventually generate the average median household income of your study area, as well as the average percentage BAs in the tracts within your study area and the average percentage non-white of the tracts within your study area. So as part of the lab, in the instructions, you are walking through the steps to get these measures from the Census Bureau. And ultimately, when you have them, you're going to take a process that looks a little bit like this. So here I'm working with points that happen to be in Montgomery County, Maryland. And so if I zoom out, I see all the tracts in Montgomery County, Maryland. So what I would do is go to the Census Bureau and get these different measures for all the tracts in Montgomery County, Maryland. I'd prepare the tables using the steps I lay out in 3 additional videos to this one. And once I have them joined to the shapefile, I can then work with them here in ARC. Now, I haven't actually taken these steps with these data, but I'm going to show you what I would do at that point. So let's imagine that I've taken all 4 of those measures: total population, median household income, the things that I need to calculate percent BAs, and the things I need to calculate total non-white. And I've added them, so I have them for all of the tracks in Montgomery County. So I've taken all of that information, cleaned it up, prepared it, joined it to the shapefile, and there it is. What I'm going to do now is use a selection by location operation to identify a set of tracks, a subset of them, that are within 2 miles of my study area. So I use this tool up here, selection by location, for that step. It's something we've used before. And so I'm no longer looking at all the tracks in Montgomery County, just the ones that are near my study area. So I can say, here are some demographic characteristics of the neighborhood nearby. And we're going to report those also in this summary table. So what's the total population of all of those tracks? Well, how do you figure that out? The key is the summarize step. So if I go look at those study area tracks, open up the attribute table. Again, I haven't added all the data yet, but there is one field I'll show you, and that is ALAND 10. That is the area of each tract in square meters. And what I want to know is, what's the total area of all of these tracts? So I want to know the sum of the areas of each tract. And so here I'm going to go to County FP, because it does not repeat. They're all in Montgomery County. And I'm going to use a summarize command and just say, take a look at the ALAND and gather the sum. So I'm using County FP as the starting place for my summary, because that means collapse based on the values in that column. They're all the same, so it's just going to take them all and put them together. And when I run this command, you'll see I get this, which is telling me I've collapsed all, however many rows that was, 20-something. I could look at the original study area to see, 28. Here it is. The frequency tells me there are 28 tracks in that study area, and sum ALAND is their total area. Now, if you have population of each tract, and you do the same thing, by the way, when you're running the summary command, you can do this with more than one measure. I'll show you how in a moment. You'll want to get the sum of total pop, the sum of ALAND 10. You're going to want to get the average of percent BAs, the average of percent non-white, and the average of population density. Those are all things I specify in the instructions that you want to gather. Then once you have them, enter them into this table. Now in the document, in the lab document, there is an instruction for, once you have this row completely populated, take it, copy it by doing this, by saying, right-clicking in row 2 and saying copy, and paste it into a version of this file that is for the entire class to drop their data into. There's a link to that in the lab document. So on page 7 of the lab instructions, you'll see here I've added a link to a Google document where you can take all of your measures once you've calculated them and drop them into this spreadsheet. That's what you're asked to do this week. You can start working on your map layout. You can think about the other things that you might want to use to draw this thick description of your study area. But we're going to combine this next week with a study of all the study areas, and all of that will wrap up together into a single deliverable that's due on the last day of class.